Hello everyone, welcome back to another devlog. It's been almost a month and a half, but we're finally back to it, back to devlog 8 for the Lost Anchor. This devlog is mainly going to be about combat because combat has finally been getting to the point where it can actually feel a bit playable, and not just like a bunch of systems that are duct taped together. Right now, combat in the Lost Anchor is completely real time. There's no turn-based stuff at all. I wanted to move away from that pretty much. I know the traditional games are kind of built on that, but I wanted to switch it up a bit with that old school feel and look. You're exploring the wild outskirts, and when you finally collide with an enemy, attack one, or the enemy attacks you, the game will transition you into a dedicated combat arena for that area. Kind of like how older RPGs would pull you into a separate battle arena. One of the main things that I tried to focus on during this was making sure that transition was actually working correctly, and that was actually quite hard at first, at least. I would every time I would do it and they would actually collide, something would happen, and either the enemy would be gone itself, Rowan would never show up, or I'd get gray screened. That was something to deal with. But I finally got it to where Rowan's position and equipped states are saved whenever combat starts, and when the arena loads, both Rowan and the enemy spawn in their correct points. I did this using markers and using them as pretty much spawn points inside the arena, so whenever the code would call for it, they would just spawn in the designated areas that they should go in. Rowan also force equips his weapon whenever combat begins, so you're immediately ready to fight. You can still move, jump, and block as soon as you load in, which is really important to me. Early on though, I ran into a big issue where I couldn't really tell if damage was even working. Combat logic was firing, but there was no feedback. It just turned out that I didn't have my damage debugger and my print outputs properly enabled inside the debugger output. And that took me a long time to figure out, not gonna lie. So once I did that, it fixed everything and I was able to see the damage going through and everything just clicked. So I could finally see the damage values being printed on both Rowan and the enemies. And from there I started tweaking damage numbers and variations to get a feel for pretty much how everything was going. There's still balancing going on right now, but both sides can still damage each other properly, so I'm happy about that. My blocking function is also working a lot better now. When Rowan blocks, the incoming damage is reduced and that system is fully functional. It's still something that I want to fine tune a little bit just to get it feeling right and make sure the numbers are all working correctly, but the core idea of blocking meaningfully to protect you is there. A huge problem that I also had for a long time was whenever the combat started, the enemy behavior was an issue. The enemies that spawned in were still able to wander around before attacking you, which completely killed the tension vibes of the arena. So now, when combat begins, the enemies are forced into a chase state. They'll track you from any distance and immediately attack whenever they're in range. They don't wander around anymore, they just stay aggressive the entire fight, which makes the combat feel a lot more intense. Another good thing about the enemies spawning in now is that they can also spawn dupes. Depending on the encounter, they can spawn 1 or 2 extra enemies, so you can end up fighting up to 3 at once. At first the dupes were completely broken though, they had no navigation logic and they would just float in the air. Now they use the exact same logic as the main enemy that spawns in, so they chase, attack, and behave properly. As soon as combat starts, you're immediately pressured, which is exactly what I wanted. Another thing that I recently added to the game was Knockback, which was suggested by somebody on TikTok named Cover. Once again, thank you for the suggestions to the game. I appreciate all of you guys. I was already thinking this, but it's good that people are still on the same page with how things should be flowing, at least what I'm envisioning for the game. Both Rowan and the enemies now can get knocked back whenever they're hit. Right now it's more of a sliding knockback instead of getting launched into the air, so it doesn't fight gravity or break movement or anything. It's just kind of like Dragon Ball Z styled pushbacks whenever you get hit. The values are still pretty iffy right now, but it's got to a point where it works, and I'll be tweaking it a lot more over time. Eventually, I'll also want blocking to reduce knockback as well, not just damage, but that part isn't implemented yet, so stay tuned for that. One thing that's still missing about the game is the hit feedbacks. Even though the knockbacks work, characters don't flash red whenever they're hit yet. So it's not always clear when you're taking damage or it's actually being taken pretty much. That's something I definitely want to work on to add to the game because it makes hits feel way more satisfying and more readable. But other than that, the enemies can now fully die in combat and their death animations, although they're horrible, still play. So I still need to work on those, and I will definitely be doing polishing for Rowan and the current enemy in the game soon. It's just taking a lot of time, but you guys are sticking with me and I'm very appreciative for that, so thank you guys. I will add this to this segment of the video. Rowan doesn't have a death animation, so technically he doesn't die. He kind of just stands there. But I don't even have that set up in the code right now, because right now Since there's no save points, I have the game where if Rowan dies, the game will automatically reset. Although, like something else that I'm still working on currently, I haven't seen that yet to work yet. But it's just something that I'm going to be using as a failsafe for right now until I get save points in the game. So it's not really a big issue. The issue that I was referring to though, is right now, there's a pretty big thing that happens whenever combat ends. When all the enemies are defeated, the game is supposed to send Rowan back to the exploration world. According to the debug prints, that's exactly what's happening. His position and his equipped states are restored correctly, but visually, the screen just goes gray. And I don't know why that is, but I'm still working on it. The game doesn't crash, it just doesn't render anything right there. So that's something that still needs to be fixed because it essentially is going to complete the basics of how combat is going to be happening. So that's something that I'm working on, so we'll get there. Now, something that you guys don't know about, but things that I have planned for the game. This is just basic combat, but there's a lot more that isn't in the game yet. There isn't no combat attacks yet. Rowan will eventually have a 3-hit combo. Enemies will have multiple attack types instead of just, one generic slash or, hit. And there's no particles yet. There's no magic that's happening on the battlefield and stuff like that. So I want to get some particles going. I want to have some sword trails on the melee attacks. And nobody has any of their elemental abilities, I like to call them, since this is a sci-fi fantasy. I don't want it to be essentially magic related, even though there will be some places that do use magic. I more like for the worlds to be kind of species based, and those species just have their own racial powers, so to speak. So if you're fire, you might grow up and your race has fire powers, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. But those aren't all in the game yet, and they're going to be added essentially later on. But we're just getting the basics down of everything before we dig deep and get to adding the rest of this stuff in. Overall though, combat is finally starting to feel like actual combat instead of just a prototype, even though it's still very much a prototype. There's still a lot of fixing and polishing to do, but I have a really clear idea of where I want to take it next. I'm not going to spoil any of that yet though. I just want to keep building and refining what's already here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stick around for more, and as always, have a good one.